morning. So I'm so happy to see you there in the first seminar, internal seminar of Iraq. So we just changed the name of the internal seminar. So if you saw on the board, we put the new name of the schedule on all the button boards in the 4 buildings. So the new name will be the Iraq Faculty Research Colloquium. Okay, so we'll have a series with different colloquium each semester. So for this semester we'll have 4. As you saw in the schedule. And the opening will be with the Provost, so Professor Ryder. He will present for us his newly published book entitled The Things in Heaven and Earth, a very mysterious title, and we are all very enthusiastic to see what he will say about this book. Okay, so I will let him start. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. First, I want to thank Rachel and the research committee for organizing this colloquium series. You know, we've discussed the importance of scholarship and research in the university and the need to create an environment in which we're taking our own and each other's scholarship and research seriously. And this kind of opportunity to talk with each other about what we're doing is a wonderful thing, a step in that direction. So thank you and the committee for doing that. And thank all of you for coming to listen to this discussion of a mysterious, slightly grandiose title. What I'd like to do is talk for a while about the background of this, what this project is, some of the detail. Obviously, we can't drill too deeply into any of this. I will try some of this is rather technical, and one of the interesting things about a colloquium like this in a small university is that we're not in each other's fields, which on the one hand is an interesting opportunity because we get to learn a lot, but at the same time it's a challenge for a speaker because we're invariably talking to people who are specialists in other things, so one needs to be mindful of that. So we'll see how it works. And then we'll have some time for discussion if you haven't all fled by the time I'm finished. And then I understand there's some little reception afterwards.
Yeah, we'll have reception after the seminar.
So that's the drill. Yeah, very nice. And we also decided just yesterday that we would videotape these and one way or another make them available through the website, probably the research committee's page on the website. So it's a nice idea. Yeah. We'll work this out with IT now. Okay, so yeah, this, as Rachel mentioned, 2 months ago this was published, so it's my latest effort called The Things in Heaven and Earth. The title, of course, I borrowed or stole from Shakespeare. You may recall that there's a line in Hamlet where Hamlet says, "There are more things in heaven and earth, Horatio, than are contained in your philosophy." The specific context for that was that Horatio had just encountered the ghost of Hamlet's murdered father. And Horatio was rather surprised at seeing a ghost, since he didn't include ghosts in his worldview. And this was Hamlet's response. There's more going on in the world than you think. Part of the conceit of this project is to generalize that observation on Hamlet's part. So, this also suggests the scope of this whole idea and project. This is an effort in metaphysics and in what we would call general ontology. So it's a theory of everything, which means, by definition, it has to be very general. But you can still say some things at that level of generality, as you'll see. There used to be a joke when I was a graduate student in philosophy that one philosophy PhD student says to another you know, what are you doing your dissertation on? And the response was God, man, and the world. And of course, the response at that point was that it was time for the advisor to get involved and reel the thing in a little. But this is a sort of God, man, and the world effort. And the other thing is that the book itself is a kind of snapshot. That is, I've been working on this stuff for decades, and I will continue to do so. So this is a sort of lifetime project. And I finished the manuscript of the book maybe 2 years ago. So it was a snapshot of, it was a taking stock at that point where we were. Okay. The subtitle is called An Essay in Pragmatic Naturalism. So there is an intellectual, a philosophical context for all of this, and I want to give you some of that context. And it has to do with these two traditions, philosophical traditions, pragmatism and naturalism. Well, this is a general idea, the general purpose, you say, goal, is to describe, justify, and apply a relational ontology. So ontology here means a theory, a study of being, of existence. I told you it was general. Any kind, without specifying ahead of time what kind of thing there is in being or in existence. Just whatever that is. To study it and to describe general traits is the enterprise of ontology. That's from the Greek, ontos, being. So it's the study of being. Most of the rest of you are doing somewhat, except maybe the mathematicians, are doing somewhat more narrow stuff. You know, you're doing geology, biology, study of life, study of the earth, etc. Anthropology, study of man. Well, this is ontology, study of being. The relational is, in a way, the key and distinctive idea here. And you'll see a little later on why, or in what way that's distinctive. This project is to work out a way of thinking about whatever there is, such that whatever there is relational. And that turns out to be a minority position in intellectual history. It's a position for which I have been laughed off the stage at various conferences over the years, because most of the rest of the intellectual world thinks differently, and I'll describe why and how. Not everybody, but much of it. But anyway, that's the general idea. We can start to get at it with a little genealogy, if you'll forgive the first-person references here. This is a very American sort of thing to do, by the way, to do an academic, to infuse an individual, a personal element into an academic talk. It drives Khaimah crazy because the Russians would never do this, but you know, that's what we're doing. So, genealogy. When I went to graduate school, I studied with this fellow here, Justice Butler. And that name will mean nothing to you, and that's okay, because it means nothing to almost anybody. But the background of this is what's relevant. Butler himself had spent most of his career at Columbia University, and he was the last of the original philosophers, or philosophers doing original and significant work, the last of a tradition that we refer to as Columbia naturalism. Because it was centered around a circle of people at Columbia University in New York. So the naturalism here, you'll hear me say more about this later on. But there was a school of thought that was quite prominent in American intellectual philosophical circles especially the first half of the 20th century, called Colloquium naturalism. There were a number of you over the years who were involved here. For various reasons, Butler left Columbia in the early 70s he moved to Stony Brook University, where a couple of years later, I entered the PhD program to study with him. So he was my dissertation advisor. So Butler was the end of he was the end of this kind of naturalism, but he was the end of it associated with Columbia University. The beginning of it was the early 20th century, primarily, and this name you may know, primarily in the person of John Dewey, who was arguably the most influential American philosopher of the 20th century, certainly of the first half of the 20th century. Dewey died in 1952. He was born in 1859, so he had a long life, and when you think about the way the world changed between 1859 and 1952, you can imagine the range of experience. You know? So you're born in the pre-industrial age, and you die in the atomic age. So stuff happened. He moved to Columbia University from the University of Chicago at the beginning of the century, in 1906. So this Columbia naturalist tradition starts around that time with Dewey, and there were some other people at Columbia also at the time. And then it extends through Butler in the 50s, 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s. Dewey is also, and more well known even, as one of the key figures in the other side of this story, which is the tradition of American pragmatism, which I'll also say more about. So pragmatism has its intellectual roots in the late 19th century in two figures, primarily Charles Sanders Peirce, who some of you know of through his work in semiotics, theory of signs, and very influential. And then the other is William James, the famous psychologist, philosopher, and brother of the novelist Henry James. They were both active in writing, mostly in the latter part of the 19th century, and then the first decade of the 20th century. Well, Dewey overlapped them, and he was the